A 7-year-old girl walked into the most dangerous room in the country, wearing her dead mother's oversized dress and her own unbreakable smile. Nobody warned her. Nobody thought she needed to be warned. That was their first mistake. You are about to witness a story that will completely change how you see love, loss, and what it truly means to belong. And we promise, by the end, you'll never look at a little girl dancing the same way again. This channel tells stories that grab your heart and refuse to let go, so make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a single one. The music started without warning. It came from a speaker the size of a small car, mounted on the wall of a ballroom that belonged to a man whose name alone made grown men lower their eyes. The ballroom was inside a compound in the rolling hills of Gyeonggi province, far from any city, far from any noise that wasn't his own, and it was filled, that evening, with 43 of the most powerful criminal figures in East Asia. They were not there for entertainment. They were there because Choi Soo-hyun had summoned them, and when Choi Soo-hyun summoned you, you came. You wore your best. You bowed the correct number of degrees. You did not speak until spoken to. And you certainly did not bring a child. And yet, standing in the exact center of that enormous, gold-lit floor, surrounded by men in dark suits and women in colder expressions, was a little girl. She was 7 years old. Her name was Penny Adler. She was African. Her mother was from a coastal town in Cameroon, her father from a small English village that no longer existed on any map he cared to remember. She had her mother's wide, watchful eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she was wearing a dress 3 sizes too large that had been hemmed badly with safety pins along the bottom. She was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to be anywhere near this compound. But Penny Adler had a habit, a deeply inconvenient, profoundly unstoppable habit, of ending up exactly where she was not supposed to be. 2 hours earlier, she had been hiding in the back of a catering van. Not because she was brave. Because she was hungry, and the van had smelled like rice and warm broth, and Penny had learned a long time ago that hunger was louder than fear. The catering staff had not noticed her until they were already through the compound gates. By then, it was too late to send her back. The head caterer, a nervous man named Mr. Lim who sweated through 3 shirts on a normal Tuesday, had shoved her into a supply closet and told her, in a voice that was more prayer than instruction, "Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not exist." Penny had nodded very seriously. And then, 12 minutes later, she had heard the music. It was a traditional Korean court melody, the kind that moved like water, slow and deliberate and ancient, played on a hegium with a single accompanying drum. Penny had never heard anything like it in her life. She pressed her ear against the closet door. Then she pressed her whole face. Then, because the music was doing something to her chest that she did not have words for yet, she opened the door. She followed the sound down a corridor lined with paintings she did not look at, past 2 guards who were arguing quietly about something and did not see her, through a side door that had been left ajar by a server carrying drinks, and out onto the edge of the ballroom floor. She stood there for exactly 4 seconds, taking it all in. 43 powerful people. 1 enormous room. 1 piece of music that felt like it was pulling her forward by the hands. And then Penny Adler began to dance. She did not know the traditional steps. She had never been taught them. But she had watched her mother dance since before she could walk, had absorbed rhythm the way other children absorbed language, through the body, through repetition, through something that lived below thought. Her mother danced bikutsi, the traditional rhythm of the Beatty people, and she had danced it in their tiny flat while making dinner, while hanging washing, while crying when she thought Penny was asleep. Penny knew how to move to music that lived in the bones. So she danced to the hegium the way her mother had danced to the drums, low in the hips, strong in the feet, her arms finding a conversation with the melody that had no translation but needed none. She mixed what she knew with what she felt, and what she felt was enormous, and the room, that cold, dangerous, carefully controlled room, went completely silent. Every single person stopped talking. Somewhere, someone set down a glass. At the far end of the room, seated in the only chair that faced the floor directly, because everything in Choi Soo-hyun's world was arranged to face him, The most feared man in Gyeonggi province watched a 7-year-old girl in safety pin dress dance in a way that made the back of his throat tighten with something he had not felt in 11 years. Choi Soo-hyun was 44 years old. He had thick silver threading through otherwise black hair, a face that had learned very early how to reveal nothing, and hands that had done things he did not discuss. He had built his empire on patience and silence, and the ability to see through people before they finished their first sentence. He had not been surprised by anything or anyone in over a decade. He was surprised now. He watched the child dance for 1 full minute without speaking. Then, too, his advisor, a lean man named Director Baum, who stood always at his right shoulder, leaned down and murmured, "Sir, we should remove her. She came in with the catering." "I know where she came from," Choi said. His voice was low. It was always low. "Be quiet." Director Baum was quiet. Penny danced through the entire piece. When the music ended, she stopped, not awkwardly, not stumbling, but cleanly, like punctuation. She stood in the center of the floor, chest rising and falling, and looked up at the man in the chair at the end of the room. She did not look afraid. She looked like she was waiting to see if he had understood her. Choi Soo-hyun stood up. This was remarkable. In 11 years, he had not stood for a person who had not first stood for him. The 43 guests shifted almost imperceptibly. Someone near the back of the room actually took a small step backward. Choi walked across the floor. His footsteps made no sound on the polished wood. He stopped in front of Penny and looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Choi Soo-hyun said, in Korean accented English that was careful and precise, "If you can dance this Oprah ari, if you can dance this traditional form completely without instruction at your age, I will adopt you." It was not a joke. Choi did not make jokes. The room understood this. Several people exchanged looks that meant, "He is serious. He is actually serious." Penny tilted her head. She did not know what Oprah ari meant. She would learn later that it was a phrase from old Korean storytelling. It meant something close to little one who surprises heaven. She did not know this yet, but she understood from his tone that it was not unkind. "I already danced it," she said. That, Choi said, was the introduction. The full form has 7 movements. You only completed 2. Penny considered this. "I didn't know there were more." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He crouched down so that he was at her eye level, another thing that no one in the room had ever seen him do, and he studied her face with the same focused attention he gave to business problems that cost millions to solve. "Where is your mother?" Something moved across Penny's face. It was fast, and she controlled it well for a 7-year-old, better than most adults would have, but Choi saw it. "She's here," Penny said. It was not a lie. It was also not the truth. It was the kind of answer a child gives when the truth is too large to carry in one sentence. Choi did not push. He stood back up. He turned to Director Baum. "Find the mother," he said quietly. "Bring her here." With full courtesy. Director Baum nodded and left the room. Choi looked back at Penny. "Are you hungry?" "Yes," Penny said, with the absolute honesty of someone who had been hungry long enough to stop being embarrassed by it. "Then sit," he said, and gestured to the table. "Eat. We will speak again when your mother arrives." Penny walked to the table. She sat in a chair that probably cost more than 6 months of her family's rent. She picked up a fork with the careful grip of a child who had been taught manners by a mother who believed manners were a form of dignity. And across the room, 43 powerful people watched Choi Soo-hyun, the man who had never, in anyone's memory, voluntarily spoken to a child, pull his chair slightly closer to the table where Penny sat, and sit back down, and watch her eat with an expression that no one in the room could name. No one asked questions. But everyone in that room felt it. The sensation of standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down, unsure whether it was a cliff or a staircase. 20 minutes later, Director Baum returned. He was alone. He leaned down to Choi's ear. Whatever he said made Choi go very still in the particular way that meant something serious had arrived. Choi looked at Penny. Penny was eating steamed dumplings and looking at a painting on the wall with great concentration. Choi stood. He walked to Director Baum and spoke in a voice low enough that even the nearest guest could not hear. What Director Baum said in response made the silver in Choi's hair seem to brighten somehow, as though something had pulled tighter inside him. Where? Choi asked. The East Gate, Director Baum said. She was found collapsed near the service entrance. She must have followed the catering van on foot. She had walked. Sir, she had walked nearly 9 kilometers. Choi did not look at Penny again. Not yet. Because if he looked at her now, if he looked at this child who was eating dumplings with a small smile, who did not yet know what was waiting 9 kilometers in the direction she had come from, he was not certain what would happen to the expression on his face. And Choi Soo-hyun did not lose control of his face. Not here. Not in front of 43 people. Get the doctor, he said. Already done. And he paused. Don't tell the child yet. Director Baum hesitated. Sir, the woman is asking for the girl. Repeatedly. Choi turned. Then she is awake. Barely. Barely. Choi repeated and let out a breath that was too small to be called a sigh, but was the closest thing to one he permitted himself. Tell her the child is safe. Tell her she is eating. Tell her he stopped. Tell her she danced beautifully. Director Baum looked at him for a fraction of a second too long. Go, Choi said. It took Penny 4 more dumplings before she noticed that the room had changed. Not in any visible way. The guests were still there, still talking in low voices, still holding their glasses. The lights had not shifted. The music had not returned. But some quality of attention in the room had moved, like a school of fish that all turn at once for no visible reason. She looked toward the door, through which Director Baum had exited. Then she looked at the chair where Choi had been sitting. He was standing by the far wall, speaking quietly into a phone, and his face was, she did not have the word for it yet, would not have the word for years, braced. Like someone holding a door closed against wind. Penny set down her fork. She was 7, not stupid. Excuse me, she said to no one in particular, and got down from her chair and crossed the room toward Choi. 2 guards moved to stop her. Choi held up one hand, barely a gesture, and they stopped. Penny walked up to him. He ended his call and looked down at her. Where's my mum? She asked. Choi looked at this child, her safety-pinned dress, her watchful eyes, her hands folded in front of her with a dignity that should not have been possible at her age, and he made a decision that he would, later, identify as the first thread in the unraveling of every wall he had spent 11 years building. He crouched down to her level again. Your mother, he said carefully, is here. She followed you. Penny's eyes went wide. Is she in trouble? No, he said. She is not in trouble. But she is not very well right now. She is being looked after by a doctor. She has been sick, Penny said, and her voice was so matter-of-fact, so practiced in its steadiness, that it landed somewhere beneath Choi's ribs like a key turning. She has been sick for a long time. She doesn't like me to worry. I see, Choi said. Can I see her? He studied her face. The question was not desperate. It was not pleading or crumbling. It was the question of someone who had learned to ask for necessary things calmly, because falling apart had never once helped. Yes, he said. Come. He stood. He did not take her hand. He was not the kind of man who took hands, but he walked slowly enough that she could keep pace, and when they reached the door he held it open, and when they moved through the corridor, he matched her steps exactly. Behind them, in the ballroom, 43 people began talking at once. The room where Penny's mother lay was a guest suite, more comfortable than any place Penny had ever slept, and it smelled of clean linen and the faint, sharp scent of antiseptic. Her mother's name was Adele Adler. She was 31 years old and looked, at this moment, younger and older than that simultaneously. She had Penny's same wide eyes and considerably more of life's arithmetic written around them. She was lying on top of the covers, still in her outdoor clothes, and when the door opened and she saw Penny, she pushed herself up on her elbows with an urgency that the doctor, a quiet woman in a gray cardigan named Dr. Yeo, tried to temper. Penny. Adele's voice cracked on the single syllable. Mum. Penny crossed the room. She did not run. She walked, steadily, because she had been her mother's steadiness for long enough to have learned how. She sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. "I'm all right. I was eating dumplings." Adele let out a sound that was almost a laugh. It became something else partway through. She pulled Penny close, the too big dress and the safety pins and all, and held her for a long moment without speaking. Choi stood in the doorway. He did not enter the room. He did not speak. He watched a mother hold a child she had walked 9 kilometers on an old body to find, and he watched the child hold the mother back with a steadiness that reversed every expectation the word child carried, and something in his chest did something he had not felt since. He turned away from the door. He stood in the corridor for a moment, his back against the wall, his eyes on the ceiling. Director Baum appeared at the end of the corridor. "The guests," Baum said quietly. "Send them home," Choi said. Baum blinked. "Sir, the meeting." "Send them home. Reschedule." Baum opened his mouth, closed it, nodded, left. Choi stood in the corridor for another moment, listening to the soft sound of Adele Adler's voice through the door, too muffled to make out words, and the occasional murmur of Penny answering her. He had meant what he said, out there in the ballroom. He had not said it for the room, or for the theater of it, or to establish some kind of dominance over a situation. He had said it because, for the first time in 11 years, he had watched something that made the long silence inside him crack slightly open. He was a man who kept his word, even words spoken to 7-year-olds in safety pin dresses. Especially those. In the morning, Penny woke up in a room that was larger than the entire flat she and her mother rented in the gray part of the city, and for approximately 12 seconds, she forgot everything and simply stared at the ceiling with the pure, uncomplicated wonder of a child in a large bed. Then she remembered. She found her mother in the garden. A garden of scaled-down bonsai and flat stones and a small fountain that sounded like a very polite conversation, sitting with Dr. Yeo, who was explaining something in careful, slow English, while Adele listened with her hands wrapped around a warm cup. Penny stood in the garden doorway and watched her mother listen. Adele Adler was a woman who had been beautiful before exhaustion had begun having opinions about her face. She had come from a town on the Cameroonian coast with 2 suitcases and a scholarship and a belief in work that bordered on theology. She had built a life with bare hands and constant recalculation, and she had done it largely alone since Penny's father had proven to be the kind of man who was wonderful at beginnings and completely absent from middles. She had been sick for 8 months. She had told Penny 6. She had told the doctors 4. She had told herself 2. This was the arithmetic of a woman who had decided, quietly and without drama, that she was not going to let fear take up space that was needed for other things. Penny crossed the garden and sat beside her mother without speaking. Adele put an arm around her. Dr. Yeo excused herself with a gentle inclination of her head. They sat for a while, in the sound of the fountain. "He said he would adopt me," Penny said eventually. Adele's arm tightened slightly. "I know. Mr. Director told me." "Do you think he meant it?" Adele was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that men like him do not say things they don't mean. The question is whether meaning something and doing something are the same." Penny considered this. "They should be." "Yes," Adele agreed. "They should." "Are you going to be okay, Mum?" Adele pulled Penny closer. "I am always okay," she said. "You know this. You walked 9 kilometers when you're sick." "I walked 9 kilometers because my daughter was inside a criminal's compound, and I was not going to wait for a bus." Penny thought about this. "That was brave." "That was Tuesday," Adele said, and kissed the top of her daughter's head. Choi met them in the main room after breakfast. He was dressed in dark clothing, no suit, just clean, simple dark clothing, and he stood by the window with his hands behind his back, looking out at the hills. He turned when they entered. He looked at Adele first. Then Penny. Adele Adler met the gaze of the most feared man in Gyeonggi province with the expression of a woman who had spent years negotiating with people who held all the visible power and had learned that the only currency that survived every room was dignity. "Mr. Choi," she said. "Ms. Adler," he said. His English was careful and precise, as it had been with Penny. "Please sit." They sat. Choi sat across from them. He looked at his hands for a moment, not looking away, just looking at them, as if measuring something. I made a statement last night, he said. Yes, Adele said. I do not make statements I do not intend to honor. So I was told. I am not asking for your daughter, he said, and there was something in his voice that was the furthest possible thing from the dangerous man the world had built him up to be, something that was almost awkward, almost careful. I am not taking. I am offering. There is a difference, and I need you to understand that I understand the difference. Adele looked at him for a long time. Why? She asked. Choi did not answer immediately. He was a man who had learned the value of silence as a response, silence that said I am thinking rather than I am hiding. Finally, he said, 11 years ago, I had a daughter. The room became very still. She was 7, he said. She also danced. Not the same, but the same quality. The same. He paused. Searched. Found. The same absence of performing. She danced because the music was there, not for an audience. Adele's hands tightened around her cup. She died, Choi said, with the flatness of a sentence that has been practiced until it can be said without breaking anything. Illness. Very fast. We had very little time. Penny was watching him. He looked at Penny. When you danced last night, it was not that I thought you were her. I am not. Another pause. I am not confused about what I lost and what I am looking at now. But it was the first time in 11 years that I felt, he stopped again. Hope. Penny offered. Choi looked at her. Penny looked back. She had the expression of someone who has named a thing and is waiting to see if the name fits. Choi said, very quietly, Oprah Ari. And then he said, yes, hope. Adele asked for 3 days to think. Choi gave her a week. She spent that week in the guest rooms of the compound, because Dr. Yeo had explained that Adele should not travel for at least several days, and Adele had, after a long moment of internal argument that Penny could see happening behind her eyes, agreed. It was the strangest week of Penny's life. She explored the compound with the methodical thoroughness of a scientist and the audacity of a child who had already been to the most dangerous room in the building and come out with dumplings and a promise. She found the kitchen garden and helped an elderly groundskeeper named Mr. O trim the low hedges with scissors that were almost as big as she was. She found the library, an actual library, inside the house, with actual walls of books, and spent 2 full afternoons pulling volumes from shelves and reading the first pages of each one to determine which was worthiest of more. She also spent time with Choi, not by his invitation initially, simply by proximity, by being in the same spaces at the same times, because the compound was large but not infinite, and Penny had an instinct for finding people who were trying to be alone that resulted, reliably, in their company. The first time he was in the library, she came in and started pulling books from shelves. He watched her for a while without speaking. Can you read Korean? He asked eventually. No, she said. But the pictures are good in this one. She held up a volume of botanical illustrations. He looked at it. That was my daughter's favorite. Penny put it back on the shelf slowly, carefully, the way you place something that belongs to someone else. You can look at it, he said. She took it back. She sat in the chair across from his and turned pages, and he returned to whatever he had been reading, and they sat in the same silence for over an hour. It was the most comfortable hour Choi had spent in 11 years. By the end of the week, Adele had made her decision. She sat across from Choi in the main room, and Penny sat beside her, and the afternoon light came through the windows and made everything look more golden than it was. I have a condition, Adele said. Tell me, Choi said. If you adopt Penny, she stopped. Steadied. If you become her legal guardian, you do not take her away from me. Not while I am alive. She stays with me. She visits you. You are her father in the law, but I am her mother in the living. That is not a condition, Choi said. That is a foundation. I agree without reservation. Adele held his gaze for another moment, reading him the way she had learned to read every room she had ever been the least powerful person in. Then she said, there is one more thing. Yes, he said. If something happens to me, She felt Penny's hand find hers under the table and grip it hard. She did not look at Penny. If something happens and she needs you, you will be there. Not a financial arrangement. Not a guardian on paper. There. Choi looked at Adele Adler. This woman who had walked 9 kilometers while sick, who was sitting here negotiating for her daughter's future with the composure of someone who had decided that dignity would be her last resource if it came to that, and something shifted in him. Not the thing that had shifted at Penny's dancing, which was grief and recognition. This was something different. This was respect. The deep, structural kind. I give you my word, he said. Adele nodded. Penny gripped her mother's hand under the table and did not let go. Outside, the hills were green and enormous and indifferent, and the fountain in the garden made its polite sound, and somewhere, a future was being assembled from the most unlikely materials, a safety-pinned dress, a traditional melody, 9 kilometers of night road, and 2 words spoken in a language a little girl hadn't understood. Hope. Yes. Hope. 3 weeks after Penny Adler danced in front of 43 dangerous people and walked away with a promise, the paperwork arrived. It was very thick paperwork. Legal paperwork always was, Choi explained, when Penny asked why it needed an entire briefcase. She was sitting on the floor of the main room, her legs crossed, watching Director Baum arrange documents in piles with the expression of a man assembling a complex device he was afraid of dropping. Is all of that for me? Penny asked. All of that, Director Baum said, not looking up, represents you becoming the ward of a man who takes legal precision very seriously. What does ward mean? It means he will be responsible for you. Penny thought about this. I already have someone responsible for me. Now you will have 2. Penny looked toward the door through which she could hear, faintly, her mother's voice and Choi's voice in a conversation she was not supposed to overhear but was absolutely attempting to. Is that good? Director Baum finally looked up. He was a lean man with a face built for worry and eyes that had seen considerably more than they wanted to. He studied Penny with the expression of someone being asked a question they had not prepared for. For most children, he said carefully, 2 responsible people is better than 1. For most children, Penny repeated, what about for me? Baum looked at her for another moment. Then, very slightly, he smiled. The first smile Penny had ever seen on his face, and it changed him completely. I think, he said, that for you it might be the other way around. I think you might be the responsible one, and the rest of us will have to catch up. Penny accepted this assessment with a small nod and went back to listening at the door. The conversation behind the door was not what she expected. She was not sure what she expected. Official things. Document things. She expected the conversation to sound like the thick pile of papers on the floor, formal and dense and organized. Instead, she heard her mother laughing. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, and then there was a pause, and then Choi's voice said something in a lower register, and Adele laughed again. Longer this time, more settled. Penny did not move from the door. In 8 months of her mother being sick, she had counted her mother's real laughs the way a person counts something precious. She had 14 catalogued. This one would be 15, 16. She pressed her back against the wall beside the door and slid down until she was sitting, her knees to her chest, and she stayed there until the voices behind the door went quiet and she heard footsteps approaching. She moved quickly. She was back at the document piles when Choi opened the door, her expression one of absolute innocent engagement with a nearby stack of papers. Choi looked at her, then at the position of the papers, then at the door. You were listening, he said. I was looking at the documents, Penny said. Those documents are upside down. Penny looked at the papers. They were, in fact, upside down. She turned them over with great dignity. I like to look at them from both directions, she said. It gives me a fuller understanding. Something happened in Choi's face that was not quite a smile, but was located in the same region. Your mother wants you, he said. Adele was sitting by the window with her hands around a cup and her eyes on the hills. She looked. Penny searched for the word and found it without knowing she had found it. Lighter. Not better, not healed, not fixed. But lighter. as if she had been carrying something in a certain way for a long time and had just shifted the weight to a different hand. "Sit," she said, patting the seat beside her. Penny sat. They looked at the hills together. "He told me something," Adele said. Penny waited. "He told me he hasn't laughed in 11 years. Adele turned to look at her daughter. "I told him that was a very long time to keep a laugh waiting. And he said," she paused, a smile at the corner of her mouth. "He said he was aware." "Did he laugh?" Penny asked. "He almost did," Adele said. "He got most of the way there." "That's something." "That's a lot, actually." Adele put her arm around Penny. "Are you all right about all of this?" Penny thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about questions her mother asked, not looking for the answer Adele wanted, but the actual one. "I think so," she said. "He's not what I thought he would be." "What did you think he would be?" "Scary," Penny said. "Everyone acts scared of him. But when he looks at me, it's not scary. It's more like..." She searched. "Like how you look at old photographs." Adele was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." The signing happened on a Thursday. It was not dramatic. It did not feel, as Penny had half imagined it might, like something from a story. There were no speeches, no ceremony. Choi signed his sections. Adele signed hers. The family solicitor, a woman named Ms. Park who wore extremely sensible shoes and an expression of professional invincibility, witnessed everything and collected her copies with efficient precision. Penny was given a pen and asked to sign her name on a form that said, in language she mostly could not understand, that she agreed to the terms of the guardianship. She wrote her name very carefully, Penny Adler. Then, after a moment's pause, she wrote under it, "This is my name, and I mean it." Ms. Park looked at this addition. She looked at Penny. She looked at Choi. Choi said, "Leave it." Ms. Park left it. The first week of being officially Choi's ward was both completely ordinary and entirely strange. They went back to the city, back to the gray flat where Penny and Adele lived, and Choi did not follow them. This was the agreement. Penny's life stayed her life. He was not a presence in her daily routine. He was not going to arrive at breakfast and rearrange things. But he called. Every evening at exactly 7:15, the phone rang and Penny answered it and Choi said, "How was your day?" And Penny told him, in detail, with extensive commentary. She told him about her teacher, who smelled like chalk even when she wasn't near any. She told him about the boy at school who had cried over a maths test and then pretended he hadn't. She told him about the sparrow that had gotten into the flat through the kitchen window and her mother's entirely disproportionate response. Choi listened to all of it. He asked questions. Small questions, careful questions, the questions of someone who is learning a language they were not raised in and is being very attentive to the grammar. What does your classroom look like? What do you eat for lunch? Do you have a friend whose name you could tell him? I have one friend, Penny told him on the 4th day. Her name is Grace. Wait, no, I can't use Grace. Her name is Bet. She is very loud, and she shares her crisps. That sounds like an important quality in a friend, Choi said. It is, Penny agreed. Do you have friends? A pause. I have associates. That is not the same thing. No, he said. It is not. You should get a friend, Penny said. Someone who shares crisps. Another pause. This one had a different quality, the kind of pause that means a person is doing something with their face that they're glad no one can see. I will take that under advisement, Choi said. Then came the day everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the most deceptive kind of day, and Penny was at school when her teacher received a phone call and came back into the classroom with the particular expression that adults use when something is wrong and they are trying very hard to make their face disagree with the fact. Penny knew that expression. She had been reading it on adult faces for 8 months. Penny, her teacher said, could you come with me? Adele had been taken to hospital. It had happened fast, the way things that have been approaching slowly for a long time can still manage to arrive like a surprise. Dr. Yeo had been on the phone with Adele's regular doctor, and somewhere in the conversation a decision had been made, and now Adele was in a hospital room, and Penny was in a corridor outside it with Betty's mother, who had come to collect Penny from school and was holding her hand in the way adults hold children's hands when they want the child to know something without having to say it. Penny let her hand be held. She looked at the door of her mother's room. "Can I go in?" she asked. "Of course, love," Betty's mother said.
Penny went in.
Adele was awake. She was attached to things, tubes and monitors and quiet machinery that beeped with a patience that was almost comforting, but she was awake, and when Penny came in, her eyes went immediately to the door, and she held out her hand, and Penny took it. "I am fine," Adele said. "Mum." "I am always fine, Mum." Adele's fingers tightened around Penny's. "I need you to call him," she said. Penny looked up. "Choi." "Yes."
"Why?"
Adele met her daughter's eyes. "Because I promised him I would let him help," she said. And because her voice stayed steady, the way it always stayed steady, but Penny had learned to read the things her mother's voice did underneath its steadiness, the micro-tensions, the places where control was costing something. "Because I think it might be time to let some people help." Penny held her mother's hand and did not say, "You should have let people help sooner." She did not say, "I have been waiting for you to say this for months." She did not say, "I am 7 years old and I have been the person holding things together and I am very tired and also very fine, but also very tired." She said, "Okay." She called him. Choi arrived in under 3 hours. This was, Director Baum told Penny quietly in the corridor, extraordinarily fast for the distance. "He left," Baum said, in a tone that held something like wonder under its professional surface, "before you finish the sentence." Choi came down the corridor in dark clothing, no show of hurry in his movement. He never showed hurry, but covering ground the way someone does when standing still is not available to them as an option. He stopped when he saw Penny. She was sitting in the plastic corridor chair with her school bag on her lap, her feet not quite touching the floor, and she was not crying. She had not cried, but her face had a quality that Choi recognized at the cellular level. He had worn that face for years. He sat down in the chair beside her. He did not say, "It will be all right." He did not say, "Don't worry." He had been lied to with those sentences enough times to know what they cost the person who received them. Instead he said, "I am here." Penny looked at him. "I am here," he said again, "and I am not going anywhere." Penny looked back at the door of her mother's room. Then she leaned, very slightly, the smallest possible lean, barely a movement, and rested her head against his arm. Choi sat very still. He did not move. He stayed exactly as he was because she had made a choice to lean, and he understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it cost to choose to lean. They sat like that in the hospital corridor for a long time. The machinery behind the door beeped with its patient rhythm. And somewhere deep in the architecture of Choi Soo-hyun, in rooms he had walled off and locked and decided were no longer in use, a light came on. The hospital said Adele could go home after 5 days. Those 5 days were a reconstruction of everything Penny thought she understood about how the world worked. Choi did not leave. This was not something Penny had expected. She had expected him to arrive, to make sure things were in order, to issue quiet instructions to capable people and then return to his compound in the hills. That was what powerful men did in stories. They arranged things and then departed from the arrangement. Choi stayed in the hospital. Not in Adele's room, that was her space, and he was precise about respecting it, but in the corridor, in the waiting room, in the small family area that had uncomfortable chairs and a coffee machine that produced something only technically related to coffee. He worked from his phone and his laptop, conducting business in low voices while Penny did her schoolwork at the plastic table and Betty's mother brought soup in containers and Director Baum made a schedule out of the chaos with the controlled urgency of a man preventing a disaster by sheer organizational force. On the second day, Penny looked up from her homework and found Choi watching her. "What?" she said. "You're doing mathematics," he said. "I know. You're doing it wrong." Penny looked at her paper. "I am not." "Show me." She turned the paper. He looked at it for a moment. Then he pointed.
"This step," he said.
"You have the right answer but the wrong path. In an examination, the path matters." Penny looked at where he was pointing. But the answer is right.
Yes.
But a right answer arrived at through a flawed process is a warning. It means the next problem with the same shape may give you a wrong answer, and you won't see it coming. Penny stared at the paper. Then she looked up at him. How do you know about mathematics? I was very good at it, Choi said, without any particular pride in it. The way you state a thing that is simply true. Before other things became my work. What other things? A pause. Complicated things. Do the complicated things use mathematics? Yes, he said. Different mathematics. The kind where the numbers are not numbers. Penny thought about this for a moment. Will you teach me the right path? Choi moved his chair closer to the table. They spent the next hour on mathematics. It was, Penny thought, the strangest and most ordinary hour she had ever spent. Doing fractions in a hospital waiting room with the most feared criminal in Gyeonggi province while her mother recovered behind a door 15 meters away and a coffee machine produced its technical approximation of coffee and the world outside continued being entirely unaware of the equation being worked out at this particular plastic table. Adele came home on a Thursday. There was a small complication, not large, not critical, but enough to change things. Dr. Yeo met with Adele and Choi and then with all three of them together, and the word treatment became a word that appeared in many sentences, and so did the words regular and ongoing and monitoring. Adele listened to all of it with her hands folded and her expression in control, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was processing something large in a space that was too small for it. After Dr. Yeo left, the three of them sat in Adele and Penny's flat for the first time. Choi occupied the small armchair near the window, the room's only armchair, which had been Penny's reading chair and was slightly too small for him, a fact he accommodated without comment. Adele sat on the couch. Penny sat between them on the floor, because the floor was central, and she preferred central. I need to say something, Adele said. Yes, Choi said. I do not want to have this conversation with Penny not present, Adele said. She is 7, not invisible. She has been managing this situation longer than either of us has been in the same room. She deserves to be in the conversation. Choi looked at Penny. I agree, he said. Penny sat up straighter. The treatment they are recommending, Adele said, is in Choi City. Not here. It would mean, she paused. Penny watched her mother measure the next words before releasing them. It would mean moving. Temporarily. Maybe longer. Penny looked at the flat. She had lived here her whole life. The scuff on the wall near the kitchen door was from when she had been learning to walk. The windowsill in her room had a small carving of an elephant that she had found already there when they moved in, and she had decided it meant good luck and watered it once with a cup of water to say thank you. This flat was the shape of her whole life. Okay, Penny said. Both adults looked at her. Okay,
Adele said.
The flat will still be here, Penny said. And the elephant on the sill. We can come back. But you need the treatment and the treatment is there, and she stopped. Finished. And Choi is there. So we should go where the things we need are. Adele looked at her daughter for a moment with an expression that Penny recognized as the face of someone trying not to cry by thinking about something structural. Choi looked at Penny with the expression she had started to recognize as the one he wore when something she did rearranged something inside him. The elephant, Choi said after a moment, can come with us. Penny nodded seriously. Yes, it should. They moved 3 weeks later. The compound in the hills became, in a gradual, unannounced, completely unplanned way, a home. This happened not because anyone decided it would, but because the things that make a place a home are not decisions. They are accumulations. They are the groundskeeper teaching Penny which plants have names and which have only descriptions. They are Dr. Yeo's visits that end in tea and a conversation that lasts longer than the medical portion. They are the library, where the botanical illustration book now had a paper bookmark in the shape of a poorly cut elephant that Penny had made and inserted without comment. They are the kitchen, at 7 in the morning, when Penny and Choi's cook, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Shin who communicated primarily through food and had immediate opinions about everyone she fed, had a collaboration that produced a dish that was somehow both jollof-adjacent and distinctly Korean, and was, by universal agreement, excellent. They are the 7:15 phone call that was no longer necessary because Penny was now in the same compound, and yet still happened, because Penny called Choi every evening at 7:15 from her room to tell him about her day, and he answered every time. They are, most of all, a Thursday evening in the library, 3 months after the move, when Choi came in and found Penny asleep in the armchair with a botanical illustration book open on her lap, and he stood there for a moment, and then, very carefully so as not to wake her, he took the blanket from the reading couch and put it over her, and stood there for just a moment longer looking at her sleeping face. And something about his own face in that moment was so unguarded, so quietly enormous, that Director Baum, who had appeared in the doorway and then immediately reconsidered appearing, backed away silently and did not mention it to anyone. Then something happened that no one was prepared for. It started with a phone call that was not the 7:15 call. It started with a name that arrived in Choi's compound like a stone through glass, spoken by a man on the phone in a voice that wanted something. The name was Declan Farr. Penny heard it by accident. She was passing the study when the call came in and the door was open, and she heard Choi's voice go through a change. Not loud, not sudden, but a change nonetheless, the way weather changes, pressure before rain. She did not catch the full conversation. She caught fragments. The girl, the arrangement, not your concern, and then Choi's voice, very quiet, very final. We are done discussing this. Penny went to the kitchen. She asked Mrs. Shin for a biscuit. She ate the biscuit. She thought about what she'd heard. Then she went to find Director Baum. Baum was in his office, a small, ruthlessly organized room that smelled of paper and function, and when Penny appeared in the doorway he looked at her with the expression of a man who had recently developed a Pavlovian response to her arrivals. "Who is Declan Farr?"
Penny asked.
Baum was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, longer than natural. "Where did you hear that name?" "The study." "Were you passing or lingering?" "I was passing," Penny said with precision, "and then I lingered." Baum looked at her, looked at his desk, looked at his hands. "He is someone from Mr. Choi's past," he said carefully. "A person with whom Mr. Choi has unresolved disagreements." "What kind of disagreements?" "Old ones." "Old disagreements are worse than new ones," Penny said. "They've had more time to get complicated." Baum stared at her. "How did you?" "My mum says that," Penny said. "Is he dangerous?" "Penny, is he dangerous to us?" She held Baum's gaze, and Baum, who had worked for the most fear-inspiring man in the province for 8 years and had learned to read threat accurately, looked at this child and understood, with sudden clarity, that she was not asking as a frightened child asks. She was asking as someone who needed accurate information to make a plan. "He is a person," Baum said, "who believes he has a claim." "On what?" A pause. "On you," Baum said, very quietly. Penny stared at him. "Your father," Baum said, and then stopped, because he had already said too much and he knew it. "You should talk to Mr. Choi." Penny went to Choi's study. She knocked. She always knocked. This was one of the things they had established, a small protocol that meant I am here, and I respect this space. And he said come in, and she came in. He was sitting behind his desk. He looked at her, and something in his face told her he had expected this, which meant Director Baum had sent him a message in the time between his office and this door, which meant the adults were already in communication about how much to tell her. Penny sat down in the chair across from the desk, the chair she always sat in for serious conversations, and folded her hands. "My father," she said. Choi held her gaze. "Yes. He's alive." "Yes." Penny absorbed this. She had known her father existed, had known his name, had a single photograph that Adele had never thrown away despite everything, but alive was different from exists. It had a specific weight. "Does he know about you? About me being here?"
"He found out," Choi said.
"Recently. And he wants," she stopped. Started again. "He has a claim," Baum said. Choi was quiet for a moment. "In certain legal frameworks, a biological father's rights can," he stopped. Looked at her directly. "He wants to challenge the guardianship." The room was very still. Penny looked at the desk, at her folded hands, at the paper bookmark in the botanical book that she had moved to the desk last week to look at a particular illustration. "Can he do that?" she asked. He can attempt it, Choi said. There is a difference between the attempt and the outcome. What's the outcome? Choi leaned forward slightly. The outcome depends on several things. On what your mother wants. On what the law says. And he paused. On what you want. Penny looked up. What I want. You are the person this concerns most directly, Choi said. Courts take that into account. And so do I. He held her gaze. What do you want? Penny thought about Declan Farr. She thought about the photograph, a man with her stubborn chin and her father's general shape and no particular history in her actual life. She thought about the flat she had grown up in, her mother working 2 jobs, Adele's careful dignity and her laugh, and her 9 kilometers through the night. I want my mum to have her treatment without stress, Penny said. I want to stay here. I want things to stay the way they are. Those are reasonable things to want, Choi said. Can you make them happen? Choi looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the quiet certainty of a man who has learned that the only promises worth making are the ones you are prepared to do the impossible to keep. Yes. What happened next? Penny would not know all of it until she was much older. She would know fragments. A meeting in a legal office in the city. Choi present. Adele present. A man across the table who looked at Penny with the expression of someone recognizing a debt. She would know the sharp, controlled conversation that Choi had with Declan Farr, not heard, but seen through a glass wall, the body language of 2 men resolving something ancient and costly. She would know the moment when Declan Farr stood up from the table and left the room without looking back. She would know, that evening, when they came home and Adele sat with her on the floor of a library and said, "It is handled. He has withdrawn the challenge." She would know the quality of the relief. Not dramatic, not tearful, just the sensation of a weight that had been present since Tuesday no longer being exactly where it was.
How? Penny asked.
Adele looked at her. Then at the doorway, where Choi had appeared briefly, and then not come in, as if checking that they were all right, and then deliberately giving them the space to be all right in. He handled it, Adele said simply. Penny looked at the doorway. Mum, she said. Yes. Do you like him? Actually like him, not just, as in, is he good? Adele was quiet for a moment. He is, she said finally, the most surprising person I have ever met. Which is saying something, because I have met you. Penny took this in. Is that a yes? Adele smiled. The real kind, the kind that counted. That is a yes. 6 months after Penny Adler danced her way into Choi Soo-hyun's compound, she danced there again. This time it was intentional. She had been learning. Not formal lessons. Not yet, but the kind of learning that happens when you are in a house where someone knows a thing, and you ask to know it too. Choi had, in the weeks after the Declan Farr situation settled, begun showing her the actual form, the 7-movement traditional court dance that he had named on that first night. Slowly, in pieces, the way you teach something that matters to you. He was not, he told her on the first day, a professional teacher. I know, Penny said. I learned this because my daughter, he stopped. Studied. Because I learned alongside her. I am not certain I remember all of it correctly. We can figure out together, Penny said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, yes, I suppose we can. They worked on it in the early evenings, in the main room cleared of furniture, with no music at first, just his voice counting the beats and her feet finding them. It was slow and technical and frequently required them to start over, and on 3 separate occasions Penny sat down on the floor in the middle of a movement and said, that was wrong. I need a minute. And Choi sat down on the floor with her and waited, and it was during one of those floor-sitting pauses, on a Wednesday afternoon in the 5th week, that Adele appeared in the doorway of the main room and found them, the most feared man in the province and her 7-year-old daughter, sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor, reviewing a diagram of footwork positions that Penny had drawn on a piece of paper, and Adele stood in the doorway and did not make a sound, but her face did something so profound that even Penny, who was looking at the paper, looked up and saw it. Mum,
Penny said.
Adele shook her head. She was smiling.
Carry on, she said.
I was just, she stopped. Carry on. She left. Later, in the kitchen, when it was just Adele and Penny making tea, Penny said, "You are doing the face again." "What face?" "The one you do when something is too big." Adele poured hot water carefully into the cups. "I was thinking," she said, "that your father, your actual father, is out there somewhere and he made a choice, and because of that choice he will never know that his daughter is." She stopped. "That you are this." "What is this?"
Penny asked.
Adele set down the kettle and looked at her daughter. "Someone who makes powerful people sit on the floor," she said. "In the best possible way." The performance happened on a Sunday. It was not a performance for an audience. Technically, there were only 4 people present. Adele, Director Baum, Mrs. Shin, who had arrived uninvited with food and had subsequently refused to leave, which no one argued with, and Choi, who stood at the edge of the room and watched. Penny danced the full 7 movements. She made mistakes, not large ones, not the kind that broke the shape of the thing, but the kind that she felt in her feet as they happened, tiny wrong turnings corrected mid-motion. She kept going. She kept the quality that had stopped 43 people cold on that first night, the quality of someone dancing because the music was there, not for the watching. When she finished, she stood in the center of the room, breathing, and looked at Choi. He was very still. His face, that face that had spent 11 years learning to reveal nothing, was doing something she had never seen it do. It wasn't grief. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was the expression of someone who has been standing at the edge of an enormous thing and has finally taken a step. He crossed the room. He crouched down to her level, as he had done on that very first night, in a different room, in front of a different audience, at the beginning of everything. "Oprah Ari," he said. Penny waited. "You have completed the form," he said. "I know," she said. "In my family," he stopped. "In the tradition I was raised in, when a student completes a form, the teacher gives them a name." Penny's eyes widened slightly. "A name?" "A second name. A name that belongs to the form." He held her gaze. "Do you want it?" "Yes," Penny said, without hesitation.
"Era," he said.
"It means, it is a question. Means, is it not beautiful? Or do you not see it? It is the name given to a child who makes others see what they had stopped looking for." Penny was very quiet. "Penny Era Adler," Choi said. Behind them, Adele made a small sound. Penny did not turn around. She and Choi were looking at each other, and in the look was everything that had accumulated over 6 months. Every mathematics lesson and floor-sitting pause and 7:15 phone call and 9 kilometers of night road and legal document and small paper elephant. "Can I call you something too?"
Penny asked.
Choi looked at her. "What would you like to call me?" Penny thought about it seriously. "Not father. That's a different thing. That's a big word, and it needs to mean exactly what it means." She tilted her head. "But not Mr. Choi either. Mr. Choi is for when Baum introduces you to people." Something in Choi's face moved, that almost smile, located in the region where smiles lived. "Then what?" he said. "In my mum's language," Penny said, "there is a word.
Tanten.
It means it is what you call someone who is like an uncle, but not exactly an uncle. Someone who is chosen." "Chosen," Choi repeated. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Taunton," he said, trying the shape of it. "Yes," Penny said. "I accept," he said. The months that followed were the best months. Penny would remember them, later, with the particular clarity that the good times always have, sharpened by the knowledge of what came after, but real in themselves, complete, not diminished by their ending. Adele's treatment was working. Not perfectly, not in straight lines. Treatment never worked in straight lines, Dr. Yeo explained. It worked in curves and plateaus and occasional drops that felt like falling before they resolved into stability. But on balance, over time, the direction was right. Adele got her laugh back. Number 17, 18, then Penny stopped counting because they were too frequent to track, and that was the best possible reason to lose count. Penny started school in the city. A school she did not love immediately, but came to love in the gradual way. The art teacher who played music during class, the library that had a window seat, Bet, who transferred schools to be near her, loud as ever, reliable source of crisps. Choi took her to see a traditional performance, real performers, a full company, and they sat in the third row, and Penny watched the dancers and cataloged the movements against what she had learned, and whispered questions to Choi throughout, and he answered every single one, and the people in the row ahead of them turned around twice, and then, on the third time, seemed to decide that whatever was happening was more interesting than what was happening on stage. Director Baum, over the course of these months, transformed, almost without noticing, and entirely against his nature, from a man who processed Penny as a logistical variable into a man who kept chocolate biscuits in his desk specifically because Penny visited his office frequently, and he had noticed she liked them. He pretended not to notice that he had done this. Everyone in the compound noticed that he had done this. No one mentioned it. Mrs. Shin declared at the end of month 7 that Penny was the best thing that had ever happened to this kitchen, and also this house, and also possibly the world. She declared this in Korean. Penny did not speak Korean yet. She understood anyway. Choi taught her 3 Korean phrases. I understand, I don't understand, and this is very good, what is it? These proved sufficient for most situations. Then came the knock at the door that changed everything again. It was not Declan Farr. The story does not repeat itself that way. It was a woman. She arrived on a Monday morning, while Adele was at her treatment appointment and Penny was in the garden with Mr. O, and the knock at the main gate was answered by a security officer who relayed the information to Director Baum, who came and found Penny in the garden with an expression that Penny had learned to read as something significant has arrived, and I am not sure how to categorize it. There is someone here, Baum said. She says she is, he stopped. She says she is Choi's sister. Penny looked at him. He has a sister? He does, Baum said. He does not speak of her. There was an estrangement. A long one. How long? 11 years. Penny absorbed this with the expression she wore for information that connected to larger things. Since his daughter, she said. Baum looked at her. Yes, he said. Since then. The woman's name was Choi In-suk, and she was 3 years younger than her brother and looked nothing like him. Where he was composed, she was animated. Where he was precise, she was immediate. Where he kept everything behind glass, she carried everything in plain sight, written on a face that had not learned how to be unreadable and had apparently decided not to bother trying. She stood in the main room looking around at the compound she had not visited in 11 years, and when she saw Penny, she stopped. You, she said. Penny stood up from the chair. Me, she agreed. In-suk stared at her. You are the child, she said. The one who, she looked at Baum. The one who danced. Yes, Baum said. In-suk looked back at Penny. She had an expression that Penny could not immediately read, which was unusual for Penny, who had become accurate at reading faces, and she said something in Korean to Baum, and Baum translated. She says you are smaller than she expected. I am 7, Penny said. She says she is aware. In-suk crossed the room and crouched to Penny's level. Everyone in this story crouched to Penny's level at some point, and every time it happened it was for the same reason. Penny had a quality that made people want to speak with her directly, face to face, without the distance of height, and she looked at Penny with the complicated expression of someone who has just encountered a thing they cannot fit into any category they already had. Why did you come? Penny asked. In-suk blinked. Then, in slow, careful English, I was told, that my brother laughed. Penny thought about this. He almost laughed, she said. He got most of the way there. He is getting better at it. In-suk stared at her. He is going to be here at 3, Penny added. If you would like to see him. In-suk straightened up. She looked at Baum, then at the room, then at Penny again. Yes, she said. I would like to see him. Penny was not present for the reunion between Choi and his sister. She was in her room. She could hear not words but the shape of words, and what she heard was long and complicated, and had several points of silence that were different from peace, the kind of silence that comes when something too large to speak is being sat with. She heard, at one point, something she almost never heard from this house, a voice rising. Choi's voice. Not angry. She had never heard him angry, had only seen the particular stillness that functioned as its substitute, but raw. The sound of something that has been kept in very long being let partway out. She sat on her bed with the botanical illustrations book and the paper elephant from the windowsill, which had come with them, as promised, and she waited. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. It was Choi. He looked different. Not diminished, not undone, but as if several layers of something had been removed, and the layer beneath was not what anyone would have expected, because the layer beneath was not harder. It was the opposite. He stood in the doorway. She would like to meet you properly, he said. I met her already, Penny said. She would like to meet you with me present, he said. Penny got off the bed. She walked to the door and stopped in front of him and looked up. Are you okay? She asked. Choi looked down at her.
Taunton, she added.
Something crossed his face, enormous, quick, controlled. He said, yes. Then, after a moment, better. Good, Penny said. Let's go meet your sister. In-suk stayed for a week. By the third day, she had taught Penny 6 new Korean words, all food-related, all useful, and had a deep and ongoing argument with Mrs. Shin about the correct way to season a particular soup that Penny suspected had nothing to do with seasoning at all, and everything to do with 2 women who had both decided they were the primary caretaker of this house. By the 5th day, she had sat with Adele in the garden and had a conversation that Penny was not invited to and that lasted 2 hours and from which both women emerged looking as if they had handled something correctly. By the 7th day, when she left, there was something about the compound that had shifted. A tension, very old, very deep, the tension of an incomplete thing, had resolved. Not perfectly, not all the way, but enough. Choi saw her to the gate. Penny stood on the step and watched. She saw Choi say something to his sister. She saw In-suk respond. She saw, at the very end, just before In-suk got into the car, Choi put his hand briefly on his sister's arm. It was a small gesture. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Penny knew, the way she knew things now, the way you learn to know things when you have been paying very careful attention to a person for months, that this was enormous. She knew this because she had never, in all these months, seen Choi voluntarily touch another adult. She filed it away. She did not mention it. But that evening, at 7:15, Choi was in his study, and she called him anyway from her room, because the call was the call regardless of geography. She said, I'm glad your sister came. A pause. Yes, Choi said. So am I. Are you going to see her again? Yes, he said. And then, in a slightly different voice, quieter, more careful, I should have done that sooner. Penny thought about her mother, and the treatment, and the things Adele had held for years alone that she had eventually learned to put down. People do things when they're ready, she said. And when Choi said, they have someone who makes them look at what they've been avoiding. Penny was quiet for a moment. Is that me? She said. Yes, he said. Oprah Ari. That is very much you. Here is what no one tells you about the moment everything is finally, actually all right. It doesn't show itself. It doesn't arrive with a fanfare or a speech or a door swinging open to reveal bright light. It arrives the way the best things arrive, quietly, sideways, dressed as an ordinary Tuesday, and you only recognize it afterward, looking back, when you can see the shape of where you were standing. The Tuesday in question was in Penny's 8th month at the compound. She was in the kitchen with Mrs. Shin, learning to make japchae, glass noodles with vegetables, which required a level of concentration and a tolerance for correction that Penny found challenging and interesting in equal measure. Adele was at a treatment appointment that was, for the first time in months, described by Dr. Yeo as encouraging in a tone that meant more than the word itself. Choi was in his study. Penny dropped a wooden spoon. She picked it up. Mrs. Shin said something in Korean that probably meant be careful. Penny said in Korean, I understand, which made Mrs. Shin look pleased. Then Penny said this is very good, what is it, and pointed at the noodles, even though she knew exactly what they were, because she had learned that it made Mrs. Shin happy to explain, and making people happy with small intentional acts was something Penny had decided was worth doing on purpose. Then, from the direction of the study, she heard, just barely, just at the edge of hearing, a sound. She stopped. Mrs. Shin stopped. They looked at each other. It happened again. It was, unmistakably, Choi Soo-hyun laughing. Not a full laugh, not yet, perhaps not ever. That might be a future version of events, but a real one, short and genuine, and it came from the study, and they could hear it clearly in the kitchen because the compound was quiet on Tuesdays, and because this sound, This specific sound, from this specific man, was one that had not been heard in 11 years, and when something has been absent that long, its return fills all available space. Mrs. Shin put down her spoon. She said something in Korean, quietly, and her hand went to her mouth. Penny looked at the study door down the corridor. Then she looked at Mrs. Shin. Mrs. Shin had tears on her face. She was smiling too, broadly, unstoppably, the kind of smile that wins over the face before the face has time to check with the rest of you. She looked at Penny, and Penny looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Penny turned back to the noodles. "Should we keep going?" she asked. Mrs. Shin wiped her face,
picked up her spoon.
"Yes," she said, in her careful English. "We keep going." Choi appeared in the kitchen doorway 15 minutes later. He stood there for a moment. He looked at Mrs. Shin, who was very focused on the japchae. He looked at Penny, who was focused on the noodles in a way that might have been slightly too focused.
"You heard," he said.
"I understand," Penny said in Korean. A pause. "Penny." She looked up. His face, that extraordinary, unreadable face, was doing the thing it had been slowly, over 8 months, learning to do. It was open. Not all the way. Not without effort. But open. The way a window is open on a day when the outside temperature is finally the same as the inside, and there is no reason to stay closed. "I was reading something In-suk sent me," he said. "A letter. She wrote it years ago, and she never sent it, and she sent it now, and he stopped.
It was funny," he said.
"I had forgotten she was funny." Penny nodded. "I had forgotten," he said more slowly, "a great many things about what it was like too." He stopped again. The word he was looking for was large. To be inside a life, he finished, rather than managing one from the outside. Penny considered this carefully. "You're inside one now," she said. He looked at her. "This one," she said. "This is yours too." The kitchen was very quiet except for the soft sounds of Mrs. Shin, who had gone completely still and was doing an extremely thorough job of staring at the wall. Choi looked at Penny. Something in him, something ancient and stubborn and heavily fortified, let go. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it is." Adele came home that afternoon with the word encouraging carried in the way she walked, not performed, not hopeful in that effortful way that is hope pretending to be certainty, but the real kind, the kind that is allowed to be small and is strong for being small. She came into the kitchen. She looked at the japchae on the stove. She looked at Mrs. Shin, who had the expression of someone who has been present at something significant and is trying to treat the rest of the day with appropriate normalcy. She looked at Penny. "What did I miss?" she said. "We made noodles," Penny said. "And?" Penny met her mother's gaze. "And he laughed," she said. Adele set down her bag. She looked at Penny for a long moment, her daughter with the watchful eyes and the stubborn chin, who had come into this world already knowing things that took most people decades to find, who had danced in a room full of danger and come out the other side with a promise and a family and a second name that meant, "Is it not beautiful?" "Good," Adele said. Her voice was level. Her face was full. "Good." She pulled Penny into a hug, warm and certain and long, and Penny hugged her back, and over her mother's shoulder, she could see the doorway, where Choi had appeared again without announcing himself, the way he sometimes did, standing at the edge of things he was still learning to step into. Penny looked at him over her mother's shoulder. He looked back. She made a small gesture with her chin. "Come in." He came in. Dinner that evening was the best meal the compound had ever produced, which was saying something given Mrs. Shin's general standards. It was, at the same time, entirely ordinary. For people around a table, Director Baum had been invited and had shown up with chocolate biscuits and the expression of a man attending something he would not have been able to predict 2 years ago and was very glad to be wrong about, eating noodles and rice and 3 different dishes that Mrs. Shin had made because she handled large emotions by feeding people, and conversation that moved between English and occasional Korean phrases that Penny deployed with accuracy, and Adele was beginning to learn, and that Baum spoke fluently, and that Choi spoke in, and that the table moved through together, like a household finding its own language. Penny, at one point, knocked over her water glass. There was a brief moment of activity, Baum reaching for napkins, Mrs. Shin already there with a cloth, Adele sang Penny, with the particular note of a mother who has said this particular word many times in many contexts. And Choi said, "Leave it. Mrs. Shin has it." And Mrs. Shin had it. And the conversation continued. It was the smallest thing. It was the kind of thing that happens at every table in every household 100 times and means nothing except the exact thing it means. That this is a table where the small disasters are handled without drama because there are enough people here to handle them, and the priority is that everyone keeps talking. Penny looked at her water glass, now upright and dry, and then at Choi, who had gone back to his food and was listening to Baum finish a story about something that had happened in the city. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about the first night, the hegium, the 43 faces, the safety pin dress, the questions she had answered with her whole body before she understood what was being asked. She thought about all the distances traveled to arrive at this table. 9 kilometers on foot through the night. 11 years of silence. The 7 movements of a form danced imperfectly, then better, then complete. The distance between managing a life from the outside and being inside one. She thought, is it not beautiful?
She thought, yes.
It is. Later, when the dishes were done and Baum had gone home with his biscuit tin and Mrs. Shin had retired to her quarters and Adele was in her room reading, Penny found Choi in the library. He was in his chair. The botanical illustrations book was on the table between the chairs, her chair and his chair, the arrangement that had settled itself over months without any decision being made. She sat in her chair. She picked up the book. The paper elephant bookmark was still there. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You ask me things regularly without requesting permission," Choi said. "I notice the permission request means the question is larger than usual." "Yes," Penny said. He set down what he was reading. "Ask." Penny looked at the paper elephant. "Your daughter," she said. "What was her name?" The library was very quiet. "Era," Choi said. Penny looked up. "The name I gave you," he said. His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of something being held very carefully. "It was her name too." "I did not," he stopped. "I debated whether to give you the same name. I was concerned it might be that it would look like I was replacing what I lost. And,"
Penny said.
"And then I thought about what the name means," he said. "Is it not beautiful?
Do you not see it?"
And I thought she would have said yes. She would have looked at you and said yes immediately. She would have. His voice did something. He controlled it. She had that quality of seeing, the same one you have. He looked at Penny directly. "I gave you the name because it is true of you in itself, not because of her. But I wanted you to know it was hers too, because you should know the whole thing." Penny held the book with both hands. "She would have liked me?" she asked. "Enormously," Choi said. "She would have followed you everywhere and driven you to the edge of your patience, and you would have loved her completely." Penny smiled, the slow kind, the real kind. "I would have," she agreed. They sat in the library. The fountain outside made its polite sound. The botanical illustrations waited in the book, patient and exact, each plant labeled in 2 languages. "Taunton," Penny said. "Yes." "Thank you for telling me." "Yes," he said. "Thank you for asking." There is more story after this. There is always more story. Adele's treatment continues and the direction stays right, and Dr. Yeo uses the word encouraging often enough that it begins to carry real weight. In-suk visits twice more that year, and on the second visit she teaches Penny a song, not a sad song, a funny one, a children's song, apparently very old, that Choi also knew from childhood, and the 3 of them in the kitchen trying to remember the second verse, while Mrs. Shin does not help at all, and is visibly entertained by the whole thing. There is Penny at her new school, where she wins a dance competition with a form that her teacher does not recognize but cannot argue with, and where Bet loudly announces to the audience that this is her best friend in the world, and Penny pretends to be embarrassed, and is actually completely delighted. There is the evening, near the end of the year, when Choi attends Penny's school performance. The first time he has been in a room full of ordinary people doing an ordinary family thing in longer than he can easily count, and he sits in a plastic chair and watches his ward perform and claps at exactly the correct moment. And afterward, in the corridor, when a parent next to him says cheerfully, "Is that your daughter?" he pauses for only a fraction of a second and says, "Yes." And there is a morning in spring when Penny wakes up early and goes to the garden before anyone else is awake, and the fountain is making its sound, and the bonsai are beginning to show new growth at their tips, and she sits on the flat stone near the small hedge that Mr. O has been teaching her to trim. And she thinks about a Tuesday evening some months back when she was 7 years old and standing in the center of a room full of dangerous people with music pulling her forward. She thinks about the dress with the safety pins. She thinks about her mother walking 9 kilometers. She thinks about the word hope, said quietly in an empty room. She thinks, here is what no one tells you about the moment everything is finally all right. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives as an ordinary Tuesday. And when you look back, you see that you have been standing in it for a while. The garden is green and quiet. Penny sits on the flat stone. She does not have a word for it yet, but she will later, and the word will be home. You have just witnessed what happens when the smallest, most overlooked person in the room turns out to be the one carrying the most light. Penny did not walk into that ballroom knowing she would change everything. She walked in because the music was there and she followed it, and that is always, always enough. This story was only possible because of you. Every view, every moment of your attention is what keeps stories like this alive. The next chapter of Penny's life is being written, and every single one of you who watches to the end deserves to be there for it. Make sure you are, because what is coming will undo you in the best way.